My ex-wife took everything. Our $22 million Texas ranch, my trucking company, even my dog. You'll never recover from this, she texted. At 33, I drove Uber. One passenger left her purse in my car. When I returned it to her office, her assistant stared at me. Oh my God, you're James Holloway's son, aren't you? He worked here in 1987. I'd never heard that name. That was your father. He died 3 months ago. He owned 75% of this company. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. My name is Ethan Holloway, though I didn't know what that name really meant until I was 33 years old and driving an Uber on a rainy Tuesday night in Dallas. But let me back up. Let me tell you about the before, so you understand just how far I fell. In 2015, when I was 26 years old, I started Holloway Trucking with $50,000 I'd saved working as a long-haul driver for 5 years. Just me, one truck, and a dream of building something that mattered. I worked 18-hour days, sleeping in truck stops, eating gas station food, taking every job I could get. By 2018, I had 12 trucks and 15 drivers. By 2020, I had 30 trucks and was pulling in $4 million in annual revenue. Not bad for a kid who'd grown up in foster care and been told he'd never amount to anything. That's when I met Lena. She walked into my office on a Tuesday afternoon in August. I remember because it was 103 degrees outside and the AC in my office barely worked. She was a consultant for logistics companies, hired by one of my investors to help me scale operations. She was beautiful, long dark hair, sharp green eyes, the kind of confidence that made you believe anything she said. Your company has potential, she'd said, looking at my spreadsheets, but you're thinking too small. You need to expand. You need infrastructure. You need vision. She became my business partner within 6 months, my fiancé within a year, my wife by 2022, and she was right. Together, we built something extraordinary. She handled the business development, the contracts, the expansion. I handled operations, logistics, the ground-level work. We were a perfect team. By 2023, Holloway Trucking had 120 trucks, offices in 3 states, and revenue of $45 million. We bought a ranch, 2,200 acres outside Dallas, worth $22 million, with horses, cattle, and a main house that looked like something out of a magazine. We had matching Mercedes in the garage. We had a golden retriever named Cooper, who I loved like a child. We had everything. I thought we were happy. I thought we were building a life together. I thought the way she held my hand at investor meetings meant something. The way she'd kiss me goodnight and whisper, "We did it, baby," meant we were in this together. I was wrong. It started in January 2024. Small things I didn't notice at first. She was on her phone more, taking calls in other rooms, suddenly very interested in reviewing all our legal documents, saying we needed to update our corporate structure for tax purposes. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the person who'd helped me build everything from nothing. In March, she served me with divorce papers. I came home from a business trip, 3 days in Houston finalizing a contract, and found her sitting at our kitchen table with a man I'd never seen before. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first truck. "Ethan, this is Mitchell Bradford," she said, her voice cold and professional, like I was a stranger. "He's my attorney." "You're what?" "I'm filing for divorce. Mitchell will explain the details." The details were simple and devastating. While I'd been building the business, Lena had been systematically transferring assets into her name. The ranch, she'd somehow gotten it titled solely to her during a refinance I'd barely paid attention to, trusting her to handle the paperwork. The company, she'd restructured ownership through a series of legal maneuvers I didn't understand, using clauses in contracts I'd signed without reading carefully. The bank accounts. She'd moved everything into accounts I couldn't access. "This is insane," I said, my voice shaking. "We built this together. You can't just take everything." Mitchell Bradford looked at me with something like pity. "Mr. Holloway, your wife has documentation showing that she provided the majority of the business acumen, strategy, and capital connections that led to the company's success. The ranch was purchased primarily with loans secured through her family's connections. The vehicles are titled in her name. I'm afraid you'll find that legally she has a very strong position. I started this company. Before she came along, I built it from nothing." "You had 12 trucks," Lena interrupted, finally looking at me. Her eyes were cold, like looking at ice. 12 trucks and barely breaking even. I turned it into an empire. Don't confuse sweat with strategy, Ethan. You're a good driver. You're a terrible businessman. Without me, you're nothing. The court case lasted 4 months. I hired a lawyer, a decent one I could barely afford. Lena had Mitchell Bradford and 2 other attorneys from a firm that represented oil companies and billionaires. They buried me in paperwork, depositions that lasted 8 hours, documents I'd signed without reading carefully enough, now used against me, testimony from employees she'd carefully cultivated, saying they had always dealt with her, not me, financial records showing she'd been the one bringing in major contracts. The worst part wasn't even losing the case. It was watching it happen while knowing I'd trusted her with everything. I'd signed papers she put in front of me because she was my wife. I'd let her handle the legal restructuring because she was better at that stuff. I'd focused on the work, driving, managing, keeping the trucks running, while she'd been building a case to take it all away. The judge's ruling came in July 2024. The ranch awarded to Lena. The company, majority ownership awarded to Lena. The vehicles awarded to Lena. The bank accounts split 70-30 in Lena's favor, because I'd failed to contribute equally to business development. And Cooper, my dog. The one I'd found as a puppy on the side of the road, who slept on my side of the bed, who waited by the door every night until I came home. Awarded to Lena, because the ranch was the more suitable environment for the animal. I walked out of that courthouse with $340,000 from the bank account split. That sounds like a lot until you factor in legal fees, $180,000, debt I'd personally guaranteed for the business that was now her business, $95,000, and taxes. I had $65,000 left. Everything else was gone. The worst part was her text message that night. I was sitting in a motel room, a $59 a night place that smelled like cigarette smoke and defeat, when my phone buzzed. "You'll never recover from this. You should have known better than to think you could play in my league. Don't contact me again." I stared at that message for an hour. Then I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid in foster care. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I stayed in that motel for a week, barely eating, barely sleeping, just staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what came next. The room was on the second floor of a place called the Sunrise Motor Lodge, though there was nothing resembling Sunrise or a lodge about it. The walls were beige with water stains that looked like abstract art if you stared at them long enough. The carpet was brown, or had been white and turned brown, I couldn't tell. It smelled like decades of cigarette smoke embedded in every surface, mixed with industrial cleaner that didn't quite mask the underlying must. I was 33 years old. I'd spent the last 8 years building something I thought was mine, only to discover it never was. I had no company, no ranch, no wife, no dog, no real home beyond this $59 a night motel room with its questionable sheets and TV that only got basic cable, and I had $65,000 that needed to last until I figured out what the hell to do with my life. I thought about a lot of things that week, dark things, the kind of thoughts that come at 3 a.m. when you're lying in a strange bed in a strange room and realize everything you believed about your life was a lie. I thought about what it would be like to just stop, to not have to wake up and face another day of failure, to not have to see that text from Lena every time I looked at my phone. I thought about driving to the ranch and confronting her, screaming at her, making her understand what she'd done. But what would that accomplish? She'd won. The courts had said so. My anger wouldn't change anything. I thought about leaving Texas entirely, getting in my car and just driving until I hit an ocean or ran out of road, starting over somewhere nobody knew my name or my failures. But I'd spent my whole childhood moving from place to place, never belonging anywhere. I couldn't do that again. Mostly I thought about Cooper, about whether he was confused, wondering why I'd abandoned him, whether he'd wait by the door for me to come home, whether Lena would remember to give him the special treats he liked or scratch behind his left ear the way he loved. That hurt more than losing the ranch or the business or the money. The thought of my dog thinking I'd just left him. But on day 8, a Monday morning when the maid knocked on my door at 10 a.m. asking if I wanted the room cleaned, I woke up and thought, fuck this. I'm not giving her the satisfaction of watching me quit. I'd started from nothing before, done it at 18 when I aged out of foster care with nothing but $200 in my pocket and a duffel bag of clothes. Done it again at 26 when I bought that first truck and started Holloway Trucking. I could do it a third time. I couldn't start another trucking company. I didn't have the capital. And besides, Lena's lawyers had built ironclad non-compete clauses into the divorce settlement. I couldn't work for another trucking company for the same reason, couldn't touch anything related to logistics or freight or distribution for 3 years. She'd made sure of that, so I did the only thing I could think of. I bought a used car and signed up to be an Uber driver. The car was a 2018 Toyota Camry I found on Craigslist. Silver, 80,000 miles, a few dings in the bumper but mechanically sound. The owner was a retired teacher who'd upgraded to a newer model. She wanted $15,000. I offered $14,000 cash, and she accepted. I spent another $500 getting it detailed, another $200 on new floor mats and air fresheners, $50 on a phone mount. Made sure it was spotless because I'd learned early in business that first impressions mattered. I signed up for both Uber and Lyft on the same day, passed the background checks, watched the training videos, downloaded the apps, set up my payment information. My first ride was on a Wednesday morning in August at 5:47 a.m., a businessman heading to DFW Airport from his house in North Dallas. He got in, barely looked at me, spent the entire 20-minute ride on his phone. When we arrived, he got out without a word. No tip. No rating that I could see immediately. I sat in the airport rideshare lot, watching other drivers come and go, and thought, this is my life now. This is what happens when you trust the wrong person. My second ride that day was a college kid at SMU who needed to get to a friend's apartment. He was hungover, smelled like beer and regret. Halfway there, he asked me to pull over. I barely got the car stopped before he threw up on my pristine back seat. "Dude, I'm so sorry," he slurred, wiping his mouth. "I'll clean it up." "Just get out," I said, my voice flat. He stumbled out and I drove straight to a car wash that offered interior detailing. $200 to get the smell out and the stain removed. Uber gave me a $150 cleaning fee, which meant I was out $50 plus the time and the trauma. I sat in the car wash parking lot waiting for them to finish and wondered if this was rock bottom or if there were deeper levels I hadn't discovered yet. My third ride was better. An elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson who needed to get to MD Anderson for chemotherapy. She was thin, frail, wearing a knitted cap over where I assumed her hair had fallen out. She sat in the back seat and cried quietly the whole way. "I'm sorry," she said as we pulled up to the cancer center. "I don't mean to cry. It's just so hard sometimes." "You don't have to apologize," I told her. "You're fighting for your life. You're allowed to cry." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You're a kind young man. Your mother raised you right." "I didn't really have a mother, foster care mostly." "Then you raised yourself right. That's even more impressive." She handed me a $5 bill, more than the fare had been. "God has a plan for you. I don't know what it is, but he does." I wasn't sure about God, wasn't sure about plans. But her words stayed with me. I drove 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. It became my routine, my life, my entire existence. 5 a.m. Wake up, shower, grab coffee and a breakfast sandwich from McDonald's, $4.67 with tax. 5:30 a.m. Hit the airport. Business travelers needed early rides to catch flights. They usually tipped okay, sometimes great if they were having a good day or felt guilty about something. 10 a.m. Switched to the business district downtown, lawyers and executives going to meetings, sometimes lunch appointments, less tipping but steady fares. 2 p.m. Slower period. I'd usually grab lunch, whatever was cheapest, dollar menu usually. Or I'd hit a grocery store and buy a rotisserie chicken that would last me 3 days. 4 p.m. Evening rush. People leaving work early, heading to happy hour, going home. Good surge pricing during peak traffic. 8 p.m. Dinner shift. Restaurant goers. People heading to shows or events. Mixed tipping. Some generous, some nothing. 11 p.m. Bar and club scene. Drunk passengers who either tipped really well or puked in your car. A gamble every time. 2 a.m. Last call crowd. The drunkest of the drunk. People who should definitely not be driving. I kept plastic bags and towels in the back seat. Learned to spot the ones who were going to be sick and refuse the ride before it cost me money. I learned the patterns. Learned which areas had good fares and which were time wasters. Learned that Thursday through Saturday nights made more money than the whole rest of the week combined. Learned that airport runs in the early morning were gold. Learned that most people didn't tip, and the ones who did usually had money but remembered when they didn't. By September, I was making about $4,000 a month after expenses. Gas, car maintenance, insurance, the occasional cleaning fee when someone was sick. That's gross income of maybe $5,200, but $200 went to gas, car payment, insurance, and maintenance. Out of that $4,000 net, I paid rent, $850 for a studio in East Dallas utilities, $150, electric, water, internet, phone, food, $400 if I was very, very careful. Car expenses, $300 average, some months more for maintenance. Miscellaneous, $200, clothes, toiletries, emergencies. That left me about $2,100 a month going into savings. Not much, but more than zero. The studio apartment was in a complex that had seen better days, probably in the 1980s. 4th floor, no elevator, facing the parking lot. 400 square feet, including the bathroom. A kitchen that was really just a counter with a 2-burner stove, a mini fridge, and a microwave. A bathroom so small you couldn't turn around without hitting something. I furnished it from Goodwill and Facebook Marketplace. A mattress someone was giving away because they were upgrading, $0, but I bought a new cover for $40. A small table and 2 chairs from an estate sale, $25. A lamp, $5. A folding chair for when I had guests, not that I ever had guests, $8. Plates, cups, and utensils from the dollar store, $30 total. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's TV through them. The AC worked, but sounded like a jet engine. The hot water took 5 minutes to warm up. The toilet ran constantly unless you jiggled the handle just right, but it was mine. Nobody could take it from me. Nobody could change the locks and tell me I wasn't welcome. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. My friends, what few I'd had, were mostly business associates who'd sided with Lena or just disappeared when the money did. Nobody wants to be around failure. It's contagious, they think. I didn't have family. Never did, really. Foster care from age 5 until 18. 5 different homes in 13 years. Never stayed anywhere long enough to belong. Never had anyone who thought of me as theirs. The closest thing I'd had to family was Cooper, and he was gone too. Some nights I'd drive past the ranch. Not intentionally, just ending up there somehow. My car pointed down that familiar road like it had muscle memory. I'd slow down as I passed the gate, see the lights on in the main house, see Lena's car in the driveway. Sometimes I'd see Cooper in the yard, and my heart would stop. I never pulled in, never stopped, just drove past and kept going, like I was a ghost haunting my own former life. The loneliness was the worst part. Not the money, I'd been broke before. Not the work, I'd always worked hard. But the absolute crushing loneliness of realizing that nobody in the world actually cared whether I lived or died. If I disappeared tomorrow, who would notice? The apartment complex would eventually realize I wasn't paying rent. Uber would deactivate my account when I stopped accepting rides. But would anyone actually miss me? Would anyone wonder where I went? I didn't think so. There were moments, usually late at night after a long shift, sitting in my parked car outside my apartment building, too tired to even climb the stairs, when I thought about just giving up. Not dramatically, just stopping. Stop trying, stop fighting, stop pretending any of this mattered. But every morning I woke up, and every morning I got in that car and started driving again. Because what else was I going to do? Lena had said I'd never recover from this, and I'd be damned if I proved her right. It happened on a Tuesday night in October, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, 4 months into my life as an Uber driver. It was raining. Not just raining. One of those Texas storms that comes out of nowhere and turns the roads into rivers. I'd been about to call it a night when a ride request came in from downtown Dallas. Good surge pricing because of the weather, $32 for what would normally be an $8 ride. I accepted it. The pickup was at a high-rise office building, one of those glass towers that houses corporate headquarters and law firms and the kind of businesses that make decisions that affect thousands of lives. I pulled up to the covered entrance and waited. A young woman came running out, holding a newspaper over her head even though she was already soaked. Mid-20s, wearing a gray suit that was definitely expensive, heels that weren't meant for running in rain. She threw open the back door and practically dove in. Oh my God, this weather is insane. Thank you so much for accepting the ride. I've been trying to get a car for 20 minutes. No problem, I said, pulling away from the curb. Where to? She gave me an address in Uptown, a nice neighborhood with expensive apartments and the kind of restaurants that don't list prices on the menu. Rough day? I asked, because she looked exhausted and her mascara was running slightly from the rain. Rough month, she said with a tired laugh. I work for a logistics company and we're in the middle of a huge merger. I've been at the office until midnight every night this week. Logistics? That got my attention. I used to work in logistics. Well, trucking specifically. Yeah? What company? I hesitated. Holloway Trucking. Used to own it. Sold it recently. It wasn't exactly a lie. Lena had essentially bought me out for pennies on the dollar. Close enough to selling. Holloway Trucking? I feel like I've heard of that. Are you guys the ones who handle Southwest Regional Shipping? That was us. Small world. I work for Holloway Logistics, Inc. Different company, obviously, but same name. We're one of the big players, mostly commercial freight, warehousing, distribution. We have like 3,000 employees. Sounds like a good place to work. It is? Or it was? The founder died a few months ago, and now everyone's worried about what happens next. His kids are fighting over the estate, and nobody knows who actually owns the company. She caught herself. Sorry, I shouldn't be gossiping about work to my Uber driver. Professional boundaries and all that. Hey, What happens in the Uber stays in the Uber, I said, and she laughed. We talked about logistics for the rest of the ride. Nothing too specific, just industry stuff. She was smart, knew her business, reminded me a little of who I used to be before everything fell apart. I pulled up to her building, a sleek modern apartment complex with a doorman and everything. "Thank you so much," she said, gathering her bag. "You saved my life tonight. 5 stars for sure." "Appreciate it. Get some rest." She got out and ran toward the entrance through the rain. I waited until she was safely inside, then started to pull away. And my phone buzzed. Another ride request, this one offering decent surge pricing. I was about to accept when I glanced in the back seat. There was a purse there. Brown leather, expensive looking. She'd left it. I pulled over, grabbed it, and checked inside for ID. Her driver's license was in the wallet. Sarah Chen, age 26. And several business cards. Sarah Chen, Senior Associate, Holloway Logistics, Inc. I could have just dropped it at the nearest police station. That's probably what most people would do, but she'd been nice. She'd tipped well in the app, and she'd said she was stressed about work. The last thing she needed was to deal with a lost purse. I pulled up her office address from the business card. It was only about 20 minutes away, even in the rain. I could drop it off, maybe make her night a little less terrible. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that those 20 minutes would change my entire life. I arrived at the Holloway Logistics Inc. headquarters at 8:47 p.m. It was a massive building downtown, 30 stories of glass and steel with the company name in huge letters across the top. The kind of building that screamed money and power and everything I used to think I was building toward. The lobby was still lit up, even though it was late. I parked in a visitor spot and walked in with the purse, water dripping off me because I'd gotten soaked running from the car. The security guard at the desk looked up. "Help you?" "Yeah, hi. I'm an Uber driver. One of your employees left her purse in my car, Sarah Chen. I wanted to drop it off for her." "Sarah Chen." He checked his computer. "She's already gone home for the night. I can take that for her, make sure she gets it tomorrow." "That works. Thanks." I was about to hand it over when someone called out from across the lobby. "Wait." Sarah left her purse. A woman in her 50s came walking over quickly. She was wearing business attire even at this late hour, had reading glasses hanging around her neck on a chain, and looked like someone who'd been working there for decades. "I'm Patricia Morrison, Sarah's assistant," she said. "Thank you so much for bringing this back. She's going to be so relieved. She probably hasn't even realized it's gone yet. That girl would lose her head if it wasn't attached." "Happy to help." Patricia took the purse, checked inside quickly to make sure everything was there. "Everything looks good. I'll make sure she gets it first thing tomorrow. We really appreciate—" She stopped mid-sentence, just froze, staring at me. "Are you okay?" I asked. She was still staring, her mouth slightly open. "I'm sorry, this is going to sound strange, but what's your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Holloway." "Holloway," she repeated slowly, then barely above a whisper. "Oh my God, you're James Holloway's son, aren't you?" The name meant nothing to me. "Who?" "James Holloway. He worked here. He founded this company in 1987. She was looking at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You look exactly like him." "Exactly. How old are you?" 33. "Do you know who your father was?" "I grew up in foster care. My mom died when I was 5. I was told my father wasn't in the picture." Patricia put a hand to her mouth. "Jesus, you don't know." "Don't know what?" She glanced at the security guard, then back at me. "Can you come with me, please? I need to show you something." I should have said no. Should have just left. But something in her voice, something in the way she was looking at me, made me follow her to the elevator. We rode up in silence to the 15th floor. She led me through dark offices. Most people had gone home hours ago, to what looked like an HR department. She unlocked a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. "James Holloway," she said, opening it. "Founder and CEO. He started this company from nothing, built it into what it is today, one of the biggest logistics operations in the Southwest." She pulled out a photo, an old one, probably from the early 90s based on the quality and the style. A man standing in front of a warehouse, smiling at the camera. Dark hair, strong jaw, gray-green eyes. He looked exactly like me, or I looked exactly like him. Same face, same build, same everything. "That's your father," Patricia said quietly. "James Holloway." I couldn't speak, just stared at this photo of a stranger who had my face. "He died 3 months ago," she continued. "Heart attack. He was 71. He never married, never had any other children that anyone knew of. When he died, his estate went into probate because there were no clear heirs. The lawyers have been fighting over it ever since. This has to be a mistake, I managed. I was adopted. My last name is Holloway because that's what my birth certificate said, but I don't know anything about my birth parents. What was your mother's name? Elizabeth. Elizabeth Holloway. She died in a house fire when I was 5. Patricia pulled out another paper from the file. James Holloway's emergency contact form from 1991. Next of kin, Elizabeth Holloway, domestic partner. Relationship, mother of child. Child's name, Ethan. The room tilted. I sat down hard in a nearby chair. You're saying that man was my father? I'm saying he might have been, but there's a way to know for sure. She pulled out another document. James Holloway owned 75% of this company. The other 25% is divided among investors. When he died with no will and no clear heirs, the estate went into a legal mess. But if you're his son, if you can prove it, you're the rightful heir. How much is 75% of this company worth? She met my eyes. As of the last valuation, about $94 million, Elders. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The whole thing was insane. This is crazy. I'm an Uber driver. I just came here to return a purse. I worked for James for 32 years, Patricia said. He was a good man, a great boss, and he was alone. He never talked much about his personal life, but I know he had regrets. He told me once, years ago, that he'd lost someone he loved, and he'd spent his whole life trying to make up for it by building this company. He never tried to find me, I said, and I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. If he was my father, he just let me disappear into foster care. I don't know his reasons, but I do know this. If you're his son, this is yours. This is your inheritance, your legacy. I sat there in that dark office in a building I'd never been in before, looking at a photo of a man I'd never known who apparently had my face and my last name and a company worth nearly $100 million. What do I do? I asked. Talk to the estate lawyers. Take a DNA test. James's DNA is on file from a health screening the company did 5 years ago. If it matches, you're the heir. I drove home that night in a daze, sat in my studio apartment, my $850 a month studio with furniture from Goodwill, and pulled out the box I kept in my closet. The box with my adoption papers, my birth certificate, the few documents I had from before I entered the system. I spread them out on my kitchen table under the single light bulb that flickered when the wind blew. Birth certificate, Ethan Holloway, born March 15th, 1991. Mother, Elizabeth Holloway. Father, blank. Adoption papers from 1996, the year after my mother died. Legal name remains Ethan Holloway. Biological father unknown or deceased. Child entered state custody following mother's death. And one photo. The only photo I had of my mother. She was holding me. I couldn't have been more than 3 years old. We were standing in front of a warehouse. You could see the edge of a sign in the background. Hollow. Logis. Holloway Logistics. I'd looked at this photo 1,000 times and never really seen it. Never thought about where it was taken or what that partial sign meant. But now I saw it. Now I understood. My mother had been there. With me. At that company. With that man. With my father. The next morning, I called the number Patricia had given me for the estate lawyers. A paralegal answered and told me they'd need to schedule an appointment, probably 2 weeks out. I think I'm James Holloway's son, I said. I have documentation. There was a pause. Can you hold, please? 30 seconds later, a different voice. Mr. Holloway, this is Richard Chen, senior partner. We've been trying to locate James's heir for 3 months. Can you come to our office today? I went that afternoon. Brought every document I had, birth certificate, adoption papers, that photo. They took photocopies of everything and explained the process. DNA testing will take about a week, Richard said. He was in his 60s, gray hair, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who'd seen everything. If it matches, and based on the documentation you've brought, I believe it will, you're the biological heir to James Holloway's estate. That includes his 75% stake in Holloway Logistics, Inc., his personal assets, real estate holdings, and various investments. What happens then? Then we petition the court to declare you the rightful heir. Given that there are no other claimants and the DNA evidence is conclusive, the court will almost certainly approve it. You'll gain control of the estate. How long does that take? Once the DNA results are in, probably another 2 to 3 weeks for the court proceedings. You could be looking at full control of the estate by early November. I walked out of that law office feeling like I'd entered an alternate reality. Just yesterday I was driving Uber. Today I was potentially the heir to a $94 million fortune. I kept driving Uber while I waited. What else was I supposed to do? Sit around and imagine a future that might not happen? I'd learned the hard way not to count on things until they were absolutely real. The DNA results came back on October 24th. Richard called me personally. "Mr. Holloway, we have the results. It's a match. 99.9% probability that James Holloway was your biological father. You're his son." I had to sit down. I was in my car, parked outside a grocery store where I'd just finished a delivery, and I sat there gripping my phone. What happens now? Now we go to court. I've already filed the paperwork. The hearing is scheduled for November 3rd. It should be straightforward. We have DNA evidence, documentation, and no other claimants. The estate is yours, Mr. Holloway, or I should say, it will be very soon. The hearing was exactly as straightforward as Richard had promised. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to a brief summary of the situation, and ruled. Based on the DNA evidence and documentation provided, I hereby declare Ethan Michael Holloway the biological son and sole heir of James Holloway, deceased. All assets of the estate are to be transferred to Mr. Holloway immediately upon completion of standard legal procedures. Just like that, I owned 75% of a company I'd never worked for, inherited from a father I'd never known. The news spread fast. By that evening, it was on local news. By the next morning, it had gone national. Uber driver discovers he's secret heir to $94 million fortune. Lost son found, Texas man inherits logistics empire. From rideshare to riches, the incredible story of Ethan Holloway. My phone exploded with messages. News outlets wanting interviews, random people claiming to be long-lost relatives. My old business associates suddenly very interested in reconnecting, and one text that made my blood run cold. "Ethan, this is Lena. We need to talk." I didn't respond to Lena's text, didn't respond to the 20 others she sent over the next week, didn't answer when she called, which she did about 40 times in the first 3 days alone. The texts started reasonable. "Ethan, we need to talk. Please call me. I saw the news. I can't believe you never told me about your father. We should discuss this in person. There are things you need to know." Then they turned desperate. "Please, Ethan. I know you're angry, but we were married. That counts for something. I made mistakes. I know that. But you can't just ignore me. Think about everything we built together. Don't let it end like this." Then they turned angry. "Fine. Be childish. But this doesn't change anything between us legally. My lawyer says you can't just cut me out of your life. We have shared assets." "You're making a mistake ignoring me." I deleted everyone without fully reading them. Let the calls go to voicemail without listening to the messages. She'd had her say 6 months ago when she called me nothing. Now it was my turn to decide what she was worth. And the answer was not even a response. I was busy learning how to be wealthy, and it was harder than I expected. Richard Chen had introduced me to a whole team of people I now apparently needed. Accountants, financial advisors, estate planners, tax attorneys. They all had advice that contradicted each other's advice. They all wanted me to sign things and make decisions about matters I barely understood. "You need to think about asset allocation," my financial advisor said, a man named Thomas Brenner who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly Uber earnings used to be. "The estate is heavily concentrated in company stock. We should diversify." "You need to think about tax optimization," my accountant said, a woman named Dr. Rita Patel, who had a PhD in tax law and made my head hurt. "The inheritance is taxable, but there are strategies we can use to minimize exposure." "You need to think about succession planning," the estate lawyer said, a partner at Richard's firm named Margaret Okonkwo. "You're young and healthy, but you need a will, a trust, power of attorney documents. What happens to all this if something happens to you?" It was overwhelming. 6 months ago, I was worried about gas money and car maintenance. Now I was worried about asset allocation and estate taxes and succession planning, but I also found it exhilarating. Richard introduced me to the executive team at Holloway Logistics during my second week as the official owner. We met in the boardroom on the 30th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas, a table that could seat 20, leather chairs that probably cost more than my studio apartment. David Martinez, the CFO, was in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen multiple market crashes and survived them all. "Mr. Holloway, Ethan, if I may, your father was a brilliant man. Tough but fair. He built this company from literally one truck in 1987 to what it is today. We're glad to have his son taking over." "I don't know anything about running a company this size," I admitted. "I ran a small trucking operation. This is different." Your father didn't know either when he started, said Jennifer Washington, the COO, an African-American woman in her 40s who'd worked her way up from dispatcher to C-suite. He learned. You will too, and you have us to help. I spent the next 2 weeks doing nothing but meetings, learning about the business, reviewing financials that made my head spin, meeting employees, touring facilities across 3 states. The warehouses were massive, hundreds of thousands of square feet of organized chaos, forklifts moving pallets, workers scanning barcodes, trucks backing into loading docks. It reminded me of when I'd started Holloway trucking, except multiplied by 1,000. Your father visited every facility at least twice a year, Jennifer told me during a tour of the Houston warehouse. He knew people's names, asked about their families. He never forgot that this company runs on people, not just systems. I tried to do the same. Talked to warehouse workers, drivers, dispatchers, office staff. Most of them knew my story from the news. Some were suspicious. Who was this kid who'd appeared out of nowhere to claim their boss's empire? But most were kind, welcoming even. Your dad was a good man, one driver told me, a guy named Robert who'd worked for James for 23 years. Fair, honest, gave me a job when I was fresh out of prison and nobody else would hire me. Told me everyone deserves a second chance. I owe him everything. Stories like that made me wish I'd known my father. Made me wonder what kind of man he'd been beyond the business. Made me mourn for the relationship we'd never had. The estate included more than just the company. James had owned a house in Highland Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Dallas, where houses started at $5 million and went up from there. His was worth $8 million according to the appraisal. 6,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a home theater, a wine cellar, a 4-car garage. It felt absurd. 6 months ago, I was living in a 400-square-foot studio. Now I owned a house with rooms I might never use. He had investment accounts worth $15.4 million. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, all carefully managed by a wealth management firm that I apparently now needed to work with. He had a car collection. Not sports cars. I might have expected that from a man with his wealth. No, he collected vintage trucks. A 1954 Chevy pickup he'd restored himself. A 1967 Ford F-100 in mint condition. A 1972 GMC Sierra that looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line. 6 trucks total, valued at about $2 million collectively. He never forgot where he came from, Patricia Morrison told me when she showed me the garage where he kept them. He made his fortune in trucking, and he loved these vehicles. He'd spend weekends working on them, tuning engines, restoring details. It was his therapy. All of it now belonged to me. The house, the investments, the cars, the company. A fortune I'd never earned, never expected, inherited from a father I'd never known. On November 20th, a Monday, gray and cold, I moved into the Highland Park house. Professional movers handled everything since I barely had anything to move. My mattress from the studio, my few clothes, my laptop, the photo of my mother. That was it. That was my entire life. The movers looked confused when they saw how little I had. "Is there another load coming?" one asked. "This is it." They carried my belongings into a house with more space than 10 of me could fill. I walked through it that first night, touching furniture my father had picked out, looking at photos on his shelves, pictures of trucks, of warehouses, of the business he'd built, pictures of employees at company events, Christmas parties, retirement celebrations. He'd documented the growth of this company like a proud parent, but only one personal photo tucked in a frame on his desk in the study. It was the same photo I had, the only one I had. My mother holding me as a toddler, standing in front of a warehouse. The Holloway logistics warehouse, I now knew. He'd kept it all these years. Through decades of success, through building an empire, through everything, he'd kept this one photo, of the woman he'd loved and the son he'd lost. I picked up the frame and just stood there, crying. For the father I'd never known. For the life we could have had. For the 33 years we'd missed. For the fact that I'd been driving Uber just 2 months ago while my inheritance sat waiting in probate, and neither of us had known the other existed. But I also felt something else. Gratitude. Somehow, through the worst period of my life, through losing everything to my ex-wife, through driving Uber to survive, through that random Tuesday when Sarah Chen forgot her purse, somehow I'd ended up exactly where I needed to be to discover this truth. If Lena hadn't taken everything, I never would have been driving Uber. If I hadn't been driving Uber, I never would have picked up Sarah Chen. If Sarah hadn't left her purse in my car, I never would have walked into that building. If Patricia hadn't been working late that night, I never would have discovered who I was. Every terrible thing that had happened had been a stepping stone to this moment. That's when the doorbell rang. It was 8:47 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the security camera, installed by my father and now connected to my phone, and saw her standing on the front porch. Lena. She was wearing a black dress that I recognized as her important meeting outfit, the one she wore when she wanted to project power and sophistication. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was going to a gala, not showing up unannounced at her ex-husband's house. I almost didn't answer, almost let her stand there and ring the doorbell until she gave up and left. But I realized I needed to face her, needed to close this chapter once and for all, needed to look her in the eye and show her that I'd survived everything she'd done to me. I opened the door. "Ethan," she said, and her voice was different from the cold tone she'd used when serving me divorce papers. This was warm, concerned, the voice she'd used when we were dating, and she'd wanted me to feel cared for. "It's so good to see you. I've been so worried. You haven't been returning my calls or texts." "What do you want, Lena? Can I come in? We should talk. There are things we need to discuss." Against my better judgment, or maybe because I wanted to have this conversation in my space, on my terms, I let her in. She walked through the foyer slowly, her eyes taking everything in. The marble floors, the soaring ceilings, the chandelier that probably cost more than my first truck, the artwork on the walls, originals, I'd been told, worth hundreds of thousands. "Nice place," she said, and I could hear the calculation in her voice. She was adding it all up, determining its value, thinking about what it meant. "I read about what happened, about your father, about the inheritance. I'm so sorry you never knew him." "Are you?" She turned to face me, and for a moment the mask slipped. I saw something raw underneath. Not grief, not sympathy, but hunger. "Okay, fine. Let's be honest with each other. We always were, right? That's what made us work." "We didn't work, Lena. You destroyed me and took everything I built." "I built that business as much as you did," she snapped, and there was the real Lena, the one who'd sat across from me with Mitchell Bradford and called me nothing. "You were just the labor. I was the strategy, the vision, the brains. You'd still be running 12 trucks out of that cramped office if it weren't for me." "So you've said, multiple times. You still haven't told me why you're here." She took a breath, visibly composing herself, pulling the mask back into place. "I came here to apologize," I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Apologize? For how things ended between us, for how I handled the divorce. I was cold, I was unfair. I said things I didn't mean. I was angry and hurt, and I lashed out. But that doesn't mean I didn't love you, Ethan. We had something real once. You told me I was nothing, on my birthday. You served me divorce papers and told me I'd never recover. I was angry. You took my dog." That stopped her. She looked away. "I know, that was petty. I'm sorry about Cooper. He was always more your dog than mine. So why did you fight for him?" "Because I knew it would hurt you." She said it simply, matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. "I wanted you to hurt the way I'd hurt." "How would you hurt, Lena? How? I worked 80-hour weeks to build that company. I gave you everything. What did I do that hurt you so badly you needed to destroy me?" "You were never there." The words exploded out of her. "You were always working, always at the office, always focused on the next contract, the next expansion. I was alone all the time. I'd wake up alone, eat alone, fall asleep alone. What's the point of building an empire if you're too busy to enjoy it? So you decided to take it all." "I decided to protect myself." She stepped closer. "But that's in the past now. We can move forward. Look at where you are. You have resources now. Real resources, generational wealth. I have experience running large-scale operations. We could be partners again, Ethan. We could rebuild what we had. Maybe even..." She paused. "Maybe even try again. As a couple." I stared at her. This woman who'd called me nothing. Who'd taken everything I'd built. Who'd told me I'd never recover. Now she was standing in my house, suggesting we get back together because I had money again. "No," I said quietly. "No? Just like that?" "Just like that. Ethan, be reasonable. Think about what we could accomplish together. You need someone who understands business at this level. I know logistics, I know operations, I know how to grow companies. I could help you. Get out." "What?" "Get out of my house. Now. Ethan, don't be stupid about this. I'm offering..." I walked to my father's desk, my desk now, and pulled out a document that Richard had prepared for me 2 days ago. He'd seen this coming, had known Lena would show up eventually. I slid it across the desk toward her. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up. "That ranch you took from me, the $22 million ranch." Read the document. I watched her face as she read, watched the color drain from it, watched her hands start to shake slightly. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "It's all documented. The ranch sits on land that belongs to Holloway Logistics. Has since 1989. My father, my biological father, owned the property and leased it to the previous owners. When you bought the ranch, you bought the structures, the improvements, the surface rights, but not the land underneath. The land was never for sale. It's part of the Holloway Logistics real estate portfolio." My lawyers would have caught this. Your lawyers checked the title on the house and the obvious surface rights. They ran a standard title search, which showed clean ownership, but they didn't do a comprehensive land survey, didn't check the underlying property records going back to the 1980s, didn't realize that what looked like property tax was actually lease payments to Holloway Logistics. She was still staring at the document. "How much?" "You've been occupying my family's land for 8 months without paying proper lease fees. Current market rate is $85,000 per month. You owe 7 months back rent. That's $595,000. "I don't have that kind of cash." "Then you have 3 options. 1. Pay the back rent and continue the lease at market rate going forward. 2. Purchase the land from me for its current appraised value of $18 million. 3. Vacate the property within 90 days, as specified in the lease agreement you unknowingly entered into when you purchased the ranch." She looked up at me, and all the warmth, all the false concern, all the manipulative sweetness was gone. What remained was pure rage. "You're doing this for revenge." "No," I said calmly, and I meant it. "I'm doing this because it's my property, and you're using it without proper authorization. This is business, Lena, nothing personal. Remember? You taught me that." "This is bullshit. This is you being petty and vindictive. This is me enforcing property rights. If you don't like the terms, take it up with your lawyers, the ones who missed this during the purchase. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about their oversight." "You'll regret this," she hissed. "The only thing I regret is ever trusting you. Now get out of my house." "This isn't over, Ethan. You don't just Get out." She left, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she stormed through the foyer. The heavy door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the nearby windows. I watched from the window as she got into her Mercedes, the one that used to be ours, that she'd kept in the divorce, and peeled out of the circular driveway fast enough to leave rubber marks on the cobblestones. Then I sat down in my father's chair, in this massive house that I'd inherited from a man I'd never met, and I laughed, and laughed, until the laughing turned to crying, until I couldn't tell if I was laughing or crying, or both. She'd come here thinking she could manipulate me again, thinking I'd be so grateful for her attention, so desperate for connection, that I'd let her back into my life and my fortune. She'd been wrong. I wasn't that person anymore, that trusting, naive person who'd signed papers without reading them, who'd believed that love meant never questioning, who'd thought that marriage was a partnership instead of a business transaction. That person had died in that courthouse 6 months ago. Someone else had been born. Someone harder, wiser, more careful, someone who wouldn't make the same mistake twice. 3 weeks later, Lena's lawyer contacted Richard. She wanted to negotiate. She couldn't afford $18 million to buy the land. Turns out she'd over-leveraged herself buying the ranch and keeping up appearances. She also couldn't afford the monthly lease, and she definitely couldn't afford to just walk away from a $22 million property. "She's proposing a settlement," Richard told me. "She'll transfer the ranch back to you, along with the company shares she holds, in exchange for you forgiving the back rent and allowing her to keep the vehicles and personal property." "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should take it. You get your ranch back, you get significant shares in your old company, and you never have to deal with her again. It's a clean break." I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. Deal. By mid-December, the papers were signed. The ranch was mine again, legally and completely. Holloway Trucking was partially mine again, though Lena retained enough shares that I couldn't force her out. But I didn't need to. I had other things to focus on. I hired a property manager to run the ranch. I wasn't ready to live there. Too many memories, good and bad. But I made sure to visit once a week. On Christmas Eve, I walked through the main house. Empty now except for the furniture. I stood in the kitchen where she'd served me divorce papers. Looked out at the land my father had owned that I'd unknowingly built on. That was now mine again. And I thought about the text she'd sent me 6 months ago. "You'll never recover from this." She'd been wrong. I hadn't just recovered. I'd discovered who I really was, what I was really worth. Not in dollars, though those were nice, but in resilience, in survival, in the ability to get up one more time. I pulled out my phone and sent her one final text. "I recovered. Thanks for the motivation." Then I blocked her number.